Hello and welcome to a lecture on counselling. In today's lecture, we shall try and understand the concept of counselling and its scope in different contexts. We shall also familiarize you with the need of counselling vis-a-vis education. Also, we shall discuss the significance of the term counselling in the field of education. And finally, we shall understand the role of counsellor while dealing with the problems of youngsters and student community. First of all, let us understand the meaning of the word counselling. Counselling is a process of assistance extended by an expert in an individual situation to a needy person. According to Carl Rogers, counselling is a series of direct contact with the individual who aims to offer him assistance in changing the attitudes and behavior. Counselling is the service offered to the individual who is undergoing a problem and needs professional help to overcome it. The problem keeps him disturbed, high-strung and under tension, and unless solved, his development is hampered or stunted. Counselling, therefore, is the most specialized service requiring training in personality development and handling exceptional groups of individuals. According to Willie and Andrew, counselling involves two individuals, one seeking help and other a professionally trained person, helping to solve problems to orient and direct him towards a goal. Counselling services are, therefore, required for individuals having developmental problems because of the handicap they suffer in any area of their life, either because of hereditary factors or environmental conditions. Generally, such cases are only about 5 to 7% in a population, and therefore, counselling is required only for such a small number, as compared to guidance, which is for percent of individuals. Good defined counselling as the individualized and personalized assistance with personal, educational, vocational problems in which all pertinent facts are studied and analyzed and a solution is sought, often with the assistance of specialists, school and community resources, and personal interviews in which the counselee is taught to make his own decisions. According to Pepinski and Pepinski, counselling is a process involving an interaction between a counsellor and a client in a private setting with the purpose of helping the client change his or her behavior so that a satisfactory resolution of needs may be obtained. Wren defines counselling as counselling is a dynamic and purposeful relationship between two people in which procedures vary with the nature of students' needs, but in which there is always mutual participation by the counsellor and the student with the focus upon self-clarification and self-determination by the student. All these definitions have common base but are different in their emphasis. The difference among the three definitions stems from the fact that they have three different orientations. A recent and much accepted definition is given by Burks and Steffler, which states, counselling denotes a professional relationship between a trained counsellor and client. This relationship is usually person to person, although it may sometimes involve more than two people. It is designed to help clients to understand their self-determined goals through meaningful resolution of problems of an emotional or interpersonal nature. The merit of the definition by Burks and Steffler is that it is sufficiently theoretical and at the same time reasonably operational. The word counselling should not be confused with guidance. There is a thin line that differentiates the two. Guidance and counselling are both processes that are done to help solve an individual's problems in life. However, the way these problems are dissected and tackled vary. Guidance involves listening carefully to the problems of the burdened individuals and discussing possible ready-made solutions that could help solve or at least alleviate the problem discussed at hand. Counseling, on the other hand, involves a series of talking and listening, discussing the problem at hand, and sharing relevant information that could help the person understand the problems and make his or her own decision. Thus, we infer that counseling altogether is not giving advice, judgmental, attempting to sort out the problems of the client, expecting or encouraging a client to behave in a way in which the counselor may have behaved when confronted with a similar problem in their own life, getting emotionally involved with the client, looking at a client's problem from your own perspective based on your own value system. Before proceeding further, let's discuss some of the basic characteristics of counseling. Number 1, counseling is expected to be a process. Number 2, it is usually for normal people with problems. Number 3, it is essentially a dynamic interaction between the client and the counselor, wherein a client is expected to be frank and forthright in his approach. Number 4, it is the duty of the counselor to keep confidentiality regarding the client. Number 5, counselor has to show warmth and sympathy while listening to the client's problems. Number 6, counselor is expected to be non-judgmental and non-critical. Number 7, the relationship between the client and the counselor is expected to be genuine. Number 8, counseling usually works at the level of rapport and not at the level of transference. Number 9, even if counseling fails to fulfill the needs or expectations of the client, he should be able to terminate counseling on a positive note. And number 10, good counseling is not exploitative of the client. Further, now let's discuss the process of counseling. The process of counseling comprises of 3 steps. They are exploring, understanding, and the last one is action. Let's now discuss each of these steps in detail. Exploring is the beginning phase and it includes number 1, contracting. It is a kind of agreement between the counselor and the client prior to the counseling. In this step, counselor tells client exactly what confidentiality means to the counselor. The second phase of exploring is attending. It encourages client talk and shows that the counselor is interested in what is being said by the client. Third in the row is silence. Silence is the temporary absence of any overt verbal or paraverbal communication between counselor and the client within sessions. It places the responsibility of the session in the hands of the client. After that, we have reflecting feelings. It is basically what it sounds like. A person might be talking to you about their problem and how they are feeling about it, which may include anger, love, anxiety, or any other feeling. Then, paraphrasing. It occurs when the counselor states what client has just said, using fewer words but without changing the meaning of what client said or repeats what client has said in his own words. An active listening technique as it proves to the client that the counselor is fully engaged in the conversation. And the last is focusing. Focusing is based on awareness that there is bodily process that is more than the physical body. The second stage in the process of counseling is understanding, which includes following steps. Number 1, immediacy. Immediacy in reference to a counseling session is a term that describes the process in which a counselor invites the client to communicate events at the present moment. It can also be described as what is happening between them at that particular moment. It is one of the powerful skills in counseling. Number 2, self-disclosure. It's sharing information with others which they would not normally discover about that person. It reveals personal rather than professional information. Number 3, confronting discrepancies. It highlights incompatibility between the client's verbal and non-verbal communication. It facilitates the client's awareness of conflicts associated with specific issues of topics. Number 4, recognizing patterns. The patterns discovered over time and adapted for general. And number 5, identifying themes. To work upon and to identify different areas of interest of the client. The final phase of the process of counseling is action, and it includes following steps. Number 1, summarizing. The counselor attends to verbal and non-verbal comments from the client over a period of time. The purpose is to clarify contents and feelings of the session. Number 2, client evaluation. To appraise or judge carefully what client has said, like problems or issues and circumstances of clients in identifying psychological constructs. Number 3, client setting own goals. Finally, client sets goals that are more behavioral than outcome. Making client responsible for own behavior to set own achievable goals. I hope you have clearly understood the process of counseling, its different phases, and how each step is important to make the process of counseling successful. So let us further move on to the approaches to counseling. Prospective counselors should be aware of major approaches to counseling so as to enable them to acquire a sound basis for developing their own personal brand of counseling. The current trends in this area can be broadly classified into 3 approaches. They are: number 1, directive approach counseling; number 2, non-directive counseling; and number 3, eclectic counseling. We'll try to understand these approaches and their specifications in detail. The first one is directive approach counseling. This approach of counseling was given by E.G. Williamson and is also known as clinical method. Some important assumptions of this approach are: the very first and important assumption of this approach is that the counselor is an expert with knowledge and resources. He is wiser than the client and capable of giving directions. Number 2, since the counselor is not in a conflict situation, he is in a better position to suggest solutions. Number 3, problems are more of intellectual nature than emotional. Number 4, problems of the client have a past history which needs to be understood. Number 5, problems of the client can be tackled by intellectual approach. And the last assumption suggests that the client is not sufficient in himself to deal with his problems and needs assistance. This approach of counseling is suitable in situations where the client is immature and tailor-made solutions are provided to the client, keeping in view his welfare. The second approach, that is the non-directive counseling approach, is also known as the client-centered approach. This approach is associated with the name of Carl Rogers. The working hypothesis for this type of approach is that the client has the capability to deal with his problems in a constructive manner. For Rogers, it is the quality of relationship between counselor and client that determines the success of counseling. Carl Rogers also suggests that the counselor should empathize with the client. Some important assumptions of this approach are: number 1, the client has grown force within himself and he needs to be prodded from outside. Number 2, Warm, permissive environment will help the client to express himself. And number 3, more than the client's past, the present is very important. This approach reduces dependency on the counselor. The client becomes more mature during this type of counseling. And finally, the last approach, which is eclectic counseling, is associated with the name of F.E. Thorne. The very name eclectic suggests that two important approaches, viz., directive and non-directive approaches, are combined to address the dynamism of the client's personality. According to this approach, human personality is not static. The human being continuously strives to achieve and maintain highest level of integration, and the highest form of integration is self-actualization. Some important assumptions of this approach are as follows. The first assumption suggests that the counselor as a person affects counseling relationship. Number 2, the counselor is capable of developing his own style that is suitable for him. Number 3, the problems of client are neither exclusively intellectual nor emotional. Number 4, counselor is not rigidly tied to one approach. This type of counseling is used to solve a wide range of problems. I believe you're now familiar with the approaches to counseling. So, let's take a step ahead and move towards the need and scope of counseling. First, let's discuss the need of counseling in our day-to-day life. There is an extensive need of counseling in our educational institutions, be it a college or a school. Following are some of the points that describe the need of counseling. Counseling in general helps in number 1, counseling helps in the total development of the individual. Number 2, it helps in choosing proper courses for study. Number 3, it helps in self-realization. 4th, it helps in helping an individual to adjust with the environment. 5th, it also helps in proper vocational development and assistance. Number 6, it helps the students to secure accurate information about different courses. 7th, it helps to avoid mismatch between education and employment. Number 8, it helps to identify and motivate students from weaker society. 9th, it helps in checking wastage and stagnation. Number 10, it helps to ensure proper utilization of leisure time. 11th, it helps to identify and help children with special needs. Number 12, counseling aids in making up for the deficiencies of home. 13, it helps to identify gifted students. And lastly, counseling helps in the development of concept of self-employment and entrepreneurship among students. Now, let's shift our focus to the scope of counseling. Bragdon has identified certain situations where counseling is required. Number 1, it is required for solving the problems of students. Also, when a pupil has some problem but he is unaware of that problem. Number 2, when a pupil needs intelligent listener who has more experience than the pupil, to whom he can recite his difficulties and through which can seek suggestions for his working plan. Number 3, when the counselor has to assess those facilities which can help in resolving the pupil's problem, but the pupil doesn't enjoy such an access to those facilities. Number 4, when pupil suffers from maladjustment and needs continuous diagnosis by an expert. Number 5, when the pupil is aware of the problem but is not able to solve the problem. Majority of students lack a sense of direction, a sense of purpose and a sense of fulfillment, and include in destructive activities which lead to social damage and loss. Adequate guidance and counseling facilities is the only answer to help and guide the youth to worthwhile channels and help them to realize the goals of optimum academic, personal, and social development. Unlike other terms, counseling has different connotations which depend on professional context in which it is used and its culture. Counseling is applied in different contexts and settings and is applicable to individuals, groups, couples, and families as well. Although the advancement of technology and changing lifestyle has made life of a man comfortable, but it has also brought different complex problems along, and thus a specialized approach to deal with those problems effectively came into existence in the form of counseling. Thus, counseling is a specialized function of guidance. Counseling is a process that involves two persons, a less mature person or client and a more mature person or counselor. The counselor is an expert and gives a patient hearing to the client. The counselor does not solve the problem of client but helps the client to realize his potentialities and solve his problems. Counselor is always empathetic towards client. Counseling helps to create self-awareness amongst clients. Counseling is both preventive as well as remedial. It aims at promoting positive mental health. The general public tends to view counseling as a remedial function and emphasizes immediate goals such as problem solution, tension reduction, and the counselee may refer to the resolution of a particular conflict or problem situation. Counseling in its spirit and essence is generative. It aims at assisting the individual to develop such that he becomes psychologically mature and is capable at realizing his potentialities optimally. The secondary school counseling needs a meaningful, realistic, practical frame of reference constituent with the short-term nature at school counseling. The most fundamental feature of counseling, according to Dr. McLeod, is that it can only happen if the person seeking help, the client, wants it to happen. Before I take your leave, let's quickly recap what we have discussed today. We learned that counseling is a process of assistance extended by an expert in an individual situation to a needy person, which comprises of 3 steps: exploring, understanding, and action. There are 3 approaches to counseling. Number 1, directive approach counseling. Number 2, non-directive counseling. And number 3, eclectic counseling. And lastly, we discussed the need and scope of counseling. How much is counseling important in our daily life? And to what extent there is need of counseling in the field of education. That is all. Thank you.